The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Lighting Controls Podcast. We have another fantastic guest for you today, but before we jump into the conversation, let me just take a minute to remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association, and it's also financially supported by NAILD, the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors.
And if you haven't checked it out yet, check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. We have all of our episodes, a newsfeed, a merch store, the Council on Lighting Control Startup and Integration that Ron and I are starting, as well as a training page, which now should have some updates on it. Southern California Edison is a company out in Southern California, surprise. And I am helping them out with some lighting controls webinars coming at you. We have a schedule for the rest of 2024. They are all free, so check them out, register. They should be some great content on there. But also, huge shout out to our sponsor for this episode, ETC, also short for Electronic Theater Controls, but they're not just for theaters, they're for so much more. Really great company and really great product they just came out with. Ron and I saw this at Leducation. You should definitely check it out if you're not familiar with it. It's called Snapback. And what it does is it takes in streaming ACN and then just basically controls your DMX system, your DMX lighting, so that you can have a snapshot of whatever it is that you are controlling with your console or other DMX controlling systems. You know, we run into this a lot, Ron, right? Where we have these auditoriums and they are like, well, I just want my lighting control console. And it's like, yes, that's great, except for the fact that when you unplug your console, your light's not going to be able to be controlled anymore. So you need something to hold that look or respond to a command of some kind. And so having this snapback device installed with your lighting control console will allow you to have that seamless transition from the theatrical setup of your console to just an architectural functionality of the space. And these can be, expanded or contracted. You can have up to 50 of these devices. They each have 10 looks that can go across 10 universes of DMX right in this one device. And then you can stack them 50 more devices on top. And so you really have this expanded capability with this device. And additionally, if for some reason you don't happen to have an ETC streaming ACN product on your project, it also takes UDP commands. So really seamless integration. Great device. I love it. Really fixes a lot of the challenges that lighting controls, dealers, integrators, theatrical people deal with all day long. So I love it and really appreciate them sponsoring this episode. But let's actually get into the conversation why we're here today, which is with David. David, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are and what you do?
Sure, happy to be here. I will start by saying, long-time listener, first-time caller. So I'm really excited to be part of this podcast because I've been listening to it for a long time and really enjoying the information that's come out. My name is David Fox. I work for ETC, have for the last 25 years. So I started with ETC in technical support, doing frontline phone support, answering questions, and then transitioned to a place where I was managing technical support and customer service for a number of years. And I've always had a passion for education and training. And as we were developing our training programs for authorized service providers, I was very involved, some may say overly so, in developing some of that training and building things together so that we could educate and get people into the field with a good understanding of how to install systems, how to troubleshoot systems, how technologies work. About 10 years ago, I transitioned away from managing technical support. Probably more like 15 years ago, actually. Boy, time flies. And started doing training full time, developing curriculum not only for our service provider network, but for customers and all of our online learning and training. So the study halls, if any of you have attended those, or if anybody's been to learningstage.com, blatant commercial announcement, to take any of our classes, I'm the administrator for that, and I've been building and putting a lot of different kinds of trainings together. And that's pretty much what I've been doing. I have a big passion towards educating the industry in a lot of different ways. Um,
Well,
I
thank
started
you.
with theater. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, you started in theater, and now
I
you're in pretty
Yeah,
much
I started in
everything.
theater and now I'm with the manufacturer. I joke in my bio because it's true. That I got my big break in show business running a follow spot for a Frank Sinatra impersonator in the back of a Chinese restaurant in Burbank, California. That was high school, and I really got into lighting and really enjoyed it. I did theater for a long time, and when I came to ETC, for me, I walked into ETC feeling like I know everything this company makes. And at that point, I could program any console that they made. I'd worked with every dimmer rack. And I showed up, and there was this whole line of architectural controls because ETC was just at that point starting to launch Unison as something more than a Q light and house light control system. And I realized there was this whole world of lighting control that I knew absolutely nothing about. I'd always taken house lights for granted, right? You push the button, the lights turn on. What more is there to figure out? It's just easy. So I jumped into really trying to learn more about architectural lighting because I thought if I want to challenge myself, let me challenge myself by playing with something I don't know anything about. And I've been involved with ETC's architectural development and training pretty much ever since.
Well,
It's been
thank you so much for joining us. I mean,
Yeah,
I love hearing, long-term fan of the show, and just love I love bringing people like that on here because it's like these are the people that we talk to all the time, and I just want to like take like a microphone and just stick it in the middle of the table while we're chatting and just record it
yeah.
and put it, because I feel like there's just so many great conversations when it comes to lighting controls, and especially with companies like ETC. I mean, you guys really put a lot of effort and heart into what you do, and so I really want to just flag that and say it's really lovely chatting with everybody at ETC. They so knowledgeable, so lovely people.
I appreciate that. It's a fun place to work. I will say when I started 25 years ago, I was really looking to get out of Los Angeles because I was looking to raise a family, and Los Angeles is a great place to be from and a great place to visit, for me at least. I was born and grew up there, so before all the West Coast people are like, just I totally get it. But at the same time, I was looking to kind of expand my horizons a bit and thought I'd come to ETC. And I thought, maybe I'll be there for like 18 months while I figure out what I want to do, get an idea of what the bigger pond of lighting in the world is. And I've stayed because of the place that I work. I've
Mm.
like I said, I've been there for a long time. We all have days where we wake up and say, I don't want to go to work. But I have yet to have a day where I've woken up and said, I don't want to go work there. and
Huh.
and that is a testament to the people that I work with. And I know you
Yeah.
probably hear that a lot, and it's not because they gave me a script, it's because it's the truth. The the core
Just knock
values.
once or twice if you need help.
Right, a blinking rapidly. But
Right.
some of the core values of the company are things that I really respect, which is to listen to our customers and to give them more than they expect. And they walk their talk, and I've been
Mhm.
happy to be part of the group that helps us walk our talk in trying to do that. So yeah,
Well,
it's
and
it's it's neat.
yeah, and I mean, I think, an endorsement from an employee is so much more valuable than an endorsement from people from the outside. I mean, Ron and I have worked with ETC pretty much all our lives, I think,
Mm.
and we can't sing its praises enough. But to get that internally as well, it's just like, I think that really says a lot. And the fun thing is, you guys are like right in the Midwest. It's like a little
Yeah.
family environment there. And so to go visit, I visited last year in
Oh,
Wisconsin, and
fantastic.
flew in, and it's just sort of like, this is a cute, little, like, it's a small factory in comparison to like the larger factories in our
Very
industry.
true. Yeah.
And so
But
it's
it's
like,
not
wow.
small.
Well, no, the company itself is not small.
Well, it's small is all a perspective when you start looking at
Sure.
factories, right? I mean,
Yes.
Right.
I think, I want to say, I mean, we built, when I first started, we were in 4 different buildings that expanded to 7 different buildings.
Yep.
And we had like 3 semis with employees full time who did nothing but drive things from building to building because of the way things are being manufactured and stored. And that wasn't super efficient. So we built the building in Middleton that I know you both, that I'm sure you both have been to, and ran out of space almost immediately. And that was, I think, 170,000 square feet. And then we added another 100,000 square feet to it, and then ran out of space there. And we're getting ready to build again. And then we built the plant out in Maizomanie, which is about 20 minutes
Hmm.
away in an even smaller, cuter town. Um, and that was, I think, when we bought it, it was a little over 300,000 square feet, and everyone said, "Oh, we're not going to need space for a really long time. This is going to cover our needs forever." So much so that the University of Wisconsin actually had all their boat storage there in the winter. So you had like lighting manufacturing, and then this area that was like full of boats on trailers, which was like, okay, sure.
Yeah.
And then we bought a rigging company, and that
Yep.
ran us out of space again. So, but yeah, it's a there's a lot of factory space. I'm proud to say that almost everything that we do is made in America, and most of it is made in the factory. So we do all of our
Mhm.
own circuit boards. We do pick and place machines to put all of that together. As you know, the 3 things we really don't do is we don't smelt iron. We don't grind glass, and we don't build green boards, but we bring as many of the raw components in as possible and then manufacture it here, which is great because we provide a good resource to the community as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, from the standpoint, I mean, because you are taking on the responsibility of so much of that, you know, what is it like trying to have this architectural side? Because I mean, from a theatrical side, yes, like,
Mm.
I want to be able to call up somebody and say immediately, like, I need help, like the show's opening in an hour. But from the
Hmm.
architectural side, there's so much just OEM style approach to lighting controls, and so you get like a third party part here, you get another part there, and suddenly it becomes a finger pointing game when something goes awry. So,
Hmm.
having everything under one roof, I imagine, streamlines that troubleshooting process.
It certainly can. It helps in a lot of ways, especially when we're fortunate enough that somebody purchases everything through us. That doesn't always happen, and I completely understand why for a number of reasons. It's been a different market. It's something that we've struggled with, and we continue to struggle with. What the way I used to phrase it, and still do actually, is our early customers, or your typical entertainment customer, if you will, and not that
Hmm.
any entertainment customer is typical, and not that every situation is cookie cutter, but when I was in phone support, your typical entertainment customer was someone who had a key ring, a tool belt, and a
Yep.
phone. And when it broke, their job was to call you and ask for help. And we were, they would be, as I used to tell people, I need you to be my eyes and hands on site, and let's work on this together. And we had a person who was going to be dedicated to doing whatever needed to get done, and they had the tools, and they had enough knowledge in their facility that we could really work through troubleshooting the problem. And there was still going to be learning opportunities, of course, because they were going to discover things. I learned something new on almost every phone call as well. But you had someone who was dedicated on site as a resource because that was their job. And as we
Right.
started moving into more architectural, that started changing. And we started doing a lot of convention centers and hotels and ballrooms and things originally, and that customer changed to somebody who had a phone and a key ring. and their job was to use the key ring to open the door to grab the manufacturer's name off of the thing that wasn't working, and then use the phone to say, "Hey, get somebody here to fix it." And so that changed the service model, and I think it changed the service model for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
because either that person didn't have the knowledge to fix the system themselves, or they didn't have the time because they had a bunch of other things that are going on, right? You can't expect a catering manager to go off and do that. Same thing in the worship market, right? Where you may have
Right.
a volunteer who's come in on a weekend to make something work, but they know how to use the light board because they read the manual, but they don't understand anything in the
Yeah.
facility. I can't, the number of times I've said to someone, okay, we need to find that door that you don't have a key to, that they've told you never to go into. We need to find a way to get into that room today, because that's where we'll find the problem. Now that we're starting to do more, not so much specified architectural, because that's a lot of what we've done for a long time, where
Mm-hmm.
that does become super easy, right? Because someone has said, we want it to be an ETC system and we're going to put all ETC gear in. Now that we're starting to work with more commercial projects, and when I say commercial, what I'm talking about are code compliant buildings. And you could argue every building is code compliant, and I do regularly. But at the same time, when you're moving into that marketplace where you're being an adder to a system or a lighting control system specifically
Mm-hmm.
because of the code compliance you can meet. Now our customer is someone who is reading a report from an email that they got from someone who
Yeah.
noticed the problem and is calling and saying, "Come. I don't even know what's wrong, but we want you to come out and we need you to fix it." And I think that's a challenge that everybody in the industry is running into. I know from listening to some of the other people that have been on the podcast, it's something that we're all running into and struggling with. I think it's a revenue stream for folks like Ron,
Yeah.
because it opens the door for service contracts and things of that nature. But it's also different. Um, it's different to establish what that service expectation is, and how to meet
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So how, I guess that's that's something we don't talk about a lot on the show, is how the service model has changed for
Hmm.
manufacturers. And as I know I'm going to catch heat for this, but DMX was pretty straightforward and easy, right? You went from
For the
controller
most part,
to your
yeah.
dimmer rack, like it was pretty easy, right? And then we
Hmm.
started introducing networking. And now everyone is essentially an IT technician, right? If you're a lighting
Hmm.
operator, whether you're in a theater or it's an architectural system, you have to have some basic level of IT background in order to be able to troubleshoot your system.
If
And
you're
as you
lucky,
said, that
yeah.
right. And that's not always the case. And so obviously, dealers like myself, there's a lot of service work that we get. Um, but I know from my end how service calls, just a physical phone call to try and work it out over the phone before you send someone 2, 3, 4 hours away to a site to try and fix it over the phone for people, the amount of time that that takes has increased
Hmm.
substantially. And I
Absolutely.
know you're not in the phone center anymore, but how does that troubleshooting work for you guys, because you do provide complete systems with all the networking, the switches. And so working through that when you're talking to someone who doesn't understand what an IP address is and you're trying to walk them through how to look at the network or find the device that's offline, how has that changed for you? And then at what point is there a point where where tech support gets to it and says we need to contact a local dealer or the installer of this project and have them now get involved?
That's a great question. I'm not in support, so I will give you my hot take on it, and then our support manager Matt Carroll and our field
Sorry,
service
Matt.
manager Karen Rand may come visit me in my office, but I don't feel like I'm going to be completely off base here. It's definitely a struggle. I tell every student and everybody who's coming into the industry or new in the industry. I see it on Facebook. I talk to college students sometimes, and not in a creepy way, just in like in a conversational way, where they'll say, look, I'm getting ready to start in this industry, or I've got some downtime. What should I be doing? This was a huge thing I was a proponent of during COVID when everybody
Mm,
was having downtime. Is I said, go learn networking,
mhm.
go learn networking. It surprises me how many people still to this day don't understand some of those basics. And I don't judge anybody for it, because you have to seek it out and you have to look for it. I mean, one of the things that technology manufacturers have done, like Apple or Android, is made it so easy to get stuff connected onto a network that most people don't need to understand it. So when you actually have to go in and start configuring things, that can be tricky and difficult to get people to do. That's definitely still a challenge to get people to look at some of those things. One of the biggest and more popular phone calls that we run into is people that have added a wireless access point to their system because they want to use their phone as a remote, or they want to tie in
Yeah.
some kind of wireless thing, and getting that up and challenge and working is always a challenge, right? Because it's not our gear, it's not our phone. We don't know the technology, they don't know the technology, and we all kind of poke around together. In terms of differences in customers, though, one of the things that I think, and maybe this is more my opinion than others, so if you feel I'm wrong here, please correct me on it, is I think one of the big changes when we're working with a lot of these architectural or commercial buildings is we are very used to a service model and customers, especially for all of us that came through working with entertainment, that no one has any money, and any conversation about how is this going to get fixed if it's not under warranty was a negotiation point. And I think one of the things that's definitely changed when we're starting to work with more commercial customers, and it's a surprise to all of us, is they kind of expect a bill,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you got to come out to site, if you got to drive out for 4 hours and you need to go work on it and you're going to send them a bill for it, they're not really going to be super upset about that, because that's just what they consider to be part of the service. But from talking to a wide range of people that have come into this through the entertainment industry, that's a big change, right? Because
Right.
this isn't an organization that needs to have a bake sale to buy their console. This is an organization that has the money and it's budgeted, and they have a maintenance budget, and they expect to use it. And I think we're
Right.
always a little surprised about doing that. So I think that's one of the things that's changed in the service model. The other thing that I've noticed, and I don't know where this is coming from. It maybe it's generational, maybe it's just experiential. I'm not sure. Is people's willingness at times to troubleshoot, as opposed to
Mm.
having just a solution provided to them, is changing. Right. One of the things I say commonly, and I'm going to quote Matt Carroll on this, is we haven't tried anything and we're out of ideas, because it seems to be they know it's broken, but even how it's broken becomes part of a conversation of
Yeah.
how do you define that.
Yep.
And it's funny. I'm putting together a troubleshooting class that I'm going to be teaching, a troubleshooting soft skills class that I'm going to be
Hmm.
teaching in a couple of months. And I was talking
Nice.
to my son, who doesn't watch this podcast, so I'll talk about him and he'll never know. Shh. Um, but I was talking to my son about troubleshooting, and talking about, like, what do you carry for what are your everyday carries, and what tools should people have on their person, right? Because if I started pulling stuff out of my pockets right now, I have a ton of tools that just live in my pocket all the time. That I just don't even think about, right? I've got a
Yep.
knife, and I've got some
Yep.
screwdrivers, and I've got some stuff on my keyring. My latest really cool thing, I'll totally show this off, because we should always show off tools if we have them. But I used to smoke. I don't any longer. But I collected Zippo lighters when I was a smoker. And one of the things Zippo is now making is a set of bit holders that can live inside a
Whoa.
Zippo lighter case.
That's cool.
Which is super cool, right? Not
I love
affiliated with
that.
Zippo in any way, shape, or form. But this lives in my pocket, because it's like I
Right.
can carry that Zippo lighter again. But so he and I were talking about tools to carry and things, and he said, "Well, I don't need any of that. I just have my phone."
Mm.
And I thought about it, and I'm like, okay, you're not wrong, because the
Right.
phone is an excellent troubleshooting tool, but the
Yes.
phone The phone will only help you find a solution if you know what the problem is that you're looking for.
Yes.
You can't
Yeah.
just rely on the phone to say, this is going to fix it for me. I can just go to Google and find a solution. Because if you can't describe the problem, you can't help yourself at that point. And somewhere in the grand scheme of change over the last, I'd say, decade, and I see this not only just with my kid, but I see this happening overall, is there's a lack of that skill of I'm going to
Mm,
try to figure out what the problem is before I look for a solution. I'm just going to try and find a solution even though I don't understand what the problem is. That's a big thing I think we all combat, right?
Right.
yeah.
Well, and I think, that goes to your credit, looking at the learning stage and these other resources that ETC has created for the purpose of training not just their own technicians, but people in general in product and resources. They're much more holistic
Hmm.
than other groups that I'm familiar with on the training process. It's not just, okay, this is how you plug the device in. It's also, this is exactly what the plug looks like, how you terminate it, like what the
Yeah.
thought process is if the plug doesn't work. Like you go through all of that. And I think, to your point, the lack of interest in troubleshooting skills is disheartening to a
Hmm.
degree, because of the fact that there is this need for people who troubleshoot stuff.
Right.
People who use something and go, why isn't this working? And personally, I'm just sitting there being like, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Have you tried that? And
I don't want
they're
your
just like,
help. Yeah.
get away from me. Yeah, exactly. So,
Exactly.
so,
Exactly.
but to our credit, and to like companies like Port, where Ron works, that's where integrators and dealers and technicians
Hmm.
really come into play, because it's like, okay, fine, you don't want to figure it out, you gotta, like you said, you gotta pay to get somebody to figure it out for you.
Right.
Whereas in the entertainment world, it's usually, okay, you gotta figure it out. And
Absolutely.
whereas in the commercial environment, there does seem to be a bit more of a tolerance to, fine, I'm gonna pay somebody to figure this out.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, which I think is good at times, because a revenue stream. It's
Yep.
something we need to get used, right? But it's also something we
Yeah.
need to get used to. I think all of us to look at. I'm sorry, you had a hand up. Go ahead.
No, 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 no. You're good. You're
Oh,
good. Keep going.
all right, fair enough. Sorry, shouldn't have recognized that.
you
Shouldn't have.
you
All
are
good.
you are showing off our hidden techniques in podcasting.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. I spend a lot of time training, so I catch the
Yep.
subtle
Yep. Yep.
clues. I
No. Yep.
apologize. Yeah, good thing we didn't call attention to it. No one will notice in the
Right,
session at all.
exactly.
Um, Totally lost my train of thought on that too.
No
But
worries.
no, finding people that are willing to do the work in the troubleshooting, I think is still a challenge. We get a lot. I get a lot of questions from dealers around the country who are struggling to try to find people, right? As people
Yes.
are aging out of the industry, or as COVID um, aged people out of the industry quickly because everybody had to take time off, and then suddenly all those people in theaters, or all those people that were more than willing to do this for the love, went and worked someplace where they got benefits and this regular salary, and then didn't want to come back again. Has caused an open position, and it's hard to find some of those people that have some of that ethic built into it, which is one of the reasons why, with like learning stage, I try, and we've all tried to put in more soft skill classes, right? There's classes that are specifically on networking fundamentals that don't talk about etc product at all. I mean, there's a lot of pictures of etc product in it, and I certainly use them as examples, but it's not a class about how to network etc stuff. It's a class about, this is how networking works, this is how
Yeah.
these things come together. And it's one of the things that I feel like is, it expands out into some of the other challenges that we run into in lighting controls and in the industry. I as a longtime listener, and someone who's listened to a lot of the episodes in the podcast, everybody keeps coming back to what I feel like, at least for the last probably dozen episodes, is we all keep circling around the same topic, um at some point or another. So I'll go there too, right? Which is that everyone is struggling to help their customer, however they're defining that customer, right? Whether it's a specifier, whether it's an end user, whether it's a whole group of people, everybody is struggling to get people to understand that there are these changes that are coming into lighting control that we all need to be aware of, and it affects everything we're doing, right? What if you're designing the systems, you need more information. If you're working in the systems, you need a better understanding of it. All of these things come back to pieces that are needed for a successful system design and to make those successful choices. And everyone's kind of hand wringing right now to say, I'm having this problem and I can't figure out how to solve it. And what I've been seeing from listening to a lot of your podcasts, and I'm sure you guys have talked about this and recognize this as well, is this is not an individual problem, right? So one of the things that's really made me feel better listening to the podcast and seeing that I'm not the only one struggling with this is that it's an endemic issue, right? It's
Right.
not just like etc can't get this component to be understood correctly. I'm seeing it from people that are trying to push out protocols and people
Yeah.
that are trying to look at system designs or full specifications or a lot of other areas where we're all kind of running into these same challenges, and they're not going away, especially in architectural lighting and in control. I don't know if you noticed or if you found out or have seen this, but the Department of Energy just released a whole new set of guidelines and standards. If you have you
Hmm.
seen that?
Yeah.
It's on my
Yep.
reading pile. It's literally right there. Um, because with an aggressive goal of decarbonization by 2050, we're going to see
Right.
some massive pushes coming really quickly that we
Yes.
all have to work with and understand.
Yeah.
And we need to get that from from end users because they don't get it, right? They're looking at us
Right.
and saying, well, you're the experts, you need to understand this, but they don't understand that you can't work in a vacuum for some of these things, right? It's going to require a
Right.
bunch of stuff.
Yeah, and see, there's part of the rub, right? Is we're all living right now, and we see all
Hmm.
these issues right now, and companies like ours are having a hard time finding technicians. And the more service calls that we get from people who don't want to troubleshoot or aren't interested, they just want someone there. I only have so many technicians I can put on the road at one time. So
Right.
it's the increase in calls and the lack of technicians and people willing to troubleshoot has made that difficult. So looking long term, this problem is only going to continue to grow. And then if you
Hmm.
take it that step further and you start looking at the idea of people not being interested or doing some troubleshooting, this is where we start to get back to the people going, well, this lighting system doesn't work because they had a couple of issues over the course and they had to call someone, and maybe that company couldn't get there for 3 or 4 days due to their current workload. And all you get is, well, this lighting system doesn't work. When in
Hmm.
reality, it was, how many times has it been as easy as a power cycle, right?
Right.
Turn it off
Absolutely.
and turn it back on. And the
Hmm.
amount of times that we've gone to site for something like that, that's not necessarily an issue with the lighting system. There was a lightning strike. There was a brownout. Take your pick. It's not necessarily specific to that system. And these
Hmm.
sorts of, that sort of mindset is only going to continue to grow problems as we look, 20 years into the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It reminds me of a real life story from phone support days. So I tell war stories. We all do.
Please do.
This is a real one that actually happened. So I get a phone call from a school. This has got to be over a decade ago. A very angry principal at a school saying who refuses to discuss the problem and says that we absolutely need to have somebody on site for a meeting tomorrow to discuss what's going to happen, and that the district is going to get involved, and there's discussions about whether or not our gear is going to be able to be allowed to be used in the school district. No discussion, no questions asked, we have to have somebody on site. So we dispatched a technician, and the technician shows up on site to a parking lot full of rental cars and walks into the school and is immediately asked, are you here for the meeting? They say yes. They're ushered into an auditorium, and there's representatives from the telecom system and the HVAC system and the alarm system and the AV system. And the principal gets up and says, what's wrong with all of your equipment? None of you installed this correctly. because it was a power issue. They'd had a lightning
Oh
boy.
strike and not a
no.
single
Yep.
piece of equipment worked on site, but immediately the fault was every single vendor had caused the problem, not an actual site related issue. So it's not an old problem. It's a
No, it's not.
persistent problem that continues to go on. The other thing I think we run into, and I think we're going to start seeing more and more of this, especially in architectural systems, is that there's nothing wrong with the system. It just isn't working the way people want it to. With
Yeah.
all of the changes that we're
Yes.
seeing coming into code in terms of requirements for, I mean, with some of the big requirements that I've been looking at, because I've been sitting in on some ASHRAE meetings and getting involved in some ASHRAE 90.1 stuff, which I'm happy to talk about if you guys want to.
Yeah,
um,
please.
are things like new requirements coming out that specify that 50% of the outlets in almost every space need to be switched outlets, and the
Yep.
switching is dependent upon occupancy state. This is going to cause a lot of confusion for people because they're
Mhm.
going to walk out of their office and their computer's going to turn off
Yep.
because they didn't plug it into the right outlet. Or requirements for lighting control with photo sensors or occupancy sensing. The big joke that I think everybody's heard tell is everybody put all these occupancy sensors in and all these light sensors into their building so that they could pass inspection, and as soon as the inspector left, they wanted it all just disabled.
Yep.
um,
Yep.
right, which we've all run into, and we've
Mhm.
all had to deal with. And the unfortunate side effect of that is it didn't get ignored. What it did is it's now making energy regulations that much stronger because the energy, the power generating companies figured it out. Southern California Edison, perfect example of that,
Yeah.
is they figured out that people were bypassing it. So suddenly they were giving them a rebate to put a bunch of stuff in, and then they bypassed it. So they got their rebate and it didn't save them any energy. And now they
Mm.
put in some new requirements. One of the things in ASHRAE 90.1 right now for the 2024 edition is there's a lot of talk about whole building energy monitoring. I'm not sure if anybody's
Mhm.
talked about this yet. You guys are nodding your heads, so you're familiar.
Well,
Um,
we have not spent a huge amount of time focused on
No.
this topic, but it is a great topic to talk about because it dovetails with conversations that we've touched on, which is the
mhm.
Yes.
electrification conversation.
Yeah, it is coming in that buildings are going to be buildings over a certain size, and what that size is becoming a topic of debate and discussion. In terms of, is it 50,000 square feet? Is it 25,000 square feet? Is it total building size? So if you have a building that's been segmented, right? It's like, okay, here's a 50,000 square foot building that's been broken up into 10,000 square foot storefronts. Um, it does, at that point, they all still have to be able to provide total energy use reporting on
Right.
everything that's being done. And I mean, it's a byproduct of some of the things that are happening. I have a theory as to
Mhm.
why some of this is coming into play. So I'll let your comments
Please,
come out
please share your
bigly for
theory.
this. Here's my theory. As we are moving towards decarbonization, and as we are moving towards a lot more changes in infrastructure, electric vehicles is like a perfect example of this.
Yep.
It is changing how power is being consumed in the country. and
Yep.
and one of the things that a lot of power plants have done, for better or for worse, and again, part of my opinions here, not the opinions reflected do not reflect my employer. Do not attack the nice people that pay me for what I'm about to say. um, is There's been a lot of regulations towards building cleaner energy and providing cleaner power plants, and what is
Yep.
required for building new power generation versus what is allowed to retrofit or refit existing power generation. So much so that the concept of building a new power plant from the ground up is prohibitively ridiculously expensive because of the regulations that everybody has
Yes.
allowed. So the last thing I think any power company wants to have to do right now is build a new power plant. But electricity is being consumed at a different rate. And it used to be
Mhm.
really easy to blame lighting, and it used to be really easy to blame HVAC. when lighting couldn't get blamed anymore, HVAC still has this ability to like hide behind a cloak of invisibility in a lot of ways. Um, but what it's now what it's starting to come down to is people want to charge their electric vehicles, and those consume a
Yep.
ridiculous amount of power. I was watching a short video on one of the tube talk tweet things. I don't remember what it is, but basically somebody was talking about there's a plant that builds electric trucks. And if you've heard the story, you guys look like you may have heard this, but so this plant builds electric trucks, and part of what they want to do is they want to charge the electric vehicles before they get shipped out after the trucks are built. Total power consumption for the factory to build the vehicles is 2 megawatts, which is not
Yeah,
ridiculous.
that's about,
Yep.
yeah.
Total charging requirement to charge the vehicles before they leave the plant is 30 megawatts. And when they went to talk to their power supplier for it, the power company was like, that's more than we produce for the entire town you're located in. Right. So this is, I think, where some of these things about energy monitoring and energy
Yep.
usage and energy savings are coming from, is they want to be able to regulate down as much as they possibly can, and they want to be able to handle that reporting. And I say this to you, and I say this to everybody that's listening, because I think we're all kind of coming from the same place, but ultimately that's going to fall on us to start trying to figure out.
Right.
Yep.
Is there's a lot of tools that can be out there to work with it and to handle some of that energy reporting, but it comes down to what are people going to touch and find.
Yeah.
And if you've got customers right now that aren't comfortable even opening a door to identify the piece of equipment that's broken, are now suddenly responsible to put together energy reports that they can submit back to show that their building is doing what it's supposed to do so that they don't get double charged.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's an interesting world we're about to step into, and I think getting
Yep.
people to understand that, and getting the people that are specifying systems, building systems, designing systems, manufacturing systems, to be working together in such a way that we can meet that challenge is going to be interesting over the next 20 years.
Well,
That's my hot
and
take.
no, and I think you bring up some excellent points here, because
Yep.
that's the thing that people don't really visualize very well when it comes to electrification, is the fact that gasoline is stored energy. You're not
Hmm.
generating it from a plant. And so
Right.
you're now taking that out of the equation by creating electric vehicles. And so suddenly the grid needs to support what was otherwise
Hmm.
just readily available. And
Yeah.
so that example you're talking about, that factory where you're more than 20 times the amount of energy to get your vehicles charged than you are to build the vehicles. That's a huge challenge, and you can't just squeeze the energy out of that plant to
Right.
compensate for that. You know,
Yeah.
that otherwise would have been a giant diesel tank on the property. And so that would have been the energy store, and you would have had trucks delivering that diesel energy. Now we
I
need a
agree.
giant pipeline of electricity going into that building.
Yeah,
So,
and that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, right? And that's
right.
something I feel pretty very passionately about. We're
Yes.
it's definitely something I support, and it's definitely a direction that I think as a planet we need to head towards, because
Yes.
we're running out of dead dinosaurs, and pulling it out of the ground, pulling them out of the ground and throwing them up in the air isn't solving is causing
Yes.
a significant number of problems that still need to get solved, right? So
Right.
I think we need to look at this. It's like you can't just say, oh well, clearly we just need to go back to cutting down trees. Um, but that's not. But I agree with you. I totally agree with you.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't think people realize, and I think, and we've had this conversation a couple times, but is as we move forward towards all of this and electrification, it really is that garden hose scenario, right?
Hmm.
Everything's fine until you try to turn it on to 110 or 120%, and the hose bursts, and
Right.
that's kind of where we're at. And I don't think people realize the electrical grid across the country, how large the grid truly is, and how much
Hmm.
work truly needs to be done to upgrade the grid to meet the demand if we don't do anything else. And that
Right.
is a lot of money that I can't even fathom the quantity
Mm-mm.
of money that they would cost to upgrade the entire grid infrastructure across the country, or how long it would actually take to do that. I mean, think about New York, right? Most of
Mhm.
those power lines are underground. Can you imagine
Right.
trying to replace all of that infrastructure?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think about New York. I think about places like Chicago, right? Where
Yep.
the city of Chicago that runs two completely independent power grids, one for normal lighting and one for emergency, that's fed to every building. And I mean, there's a lot that happens there, and I think that's where you're seeing a lot of this pushing in code and even up to the DOE level to say, let's get a better idea of how energy is being consumed. Let's get a better idea of how we can conserve what's already being created, and find some different ways to work with it. I was at ASHRAE's annual convention this year because, again, one of the things, and I'm putting together a class on energy code at
Mhm.
workshop this year. Blatant commercial announcement for those of you that are ETC partners. We will be holding our annual workshop this year. Registration just went live. You
Oh.
can come. You can enjoy fun times at the factory. But you can also come take my class on energy codes and trying to get people to understand the genesis of code and what ETC can do to help with some of these things and provide solutions. But it was interesting sitting in the ASHRAE meetings, and listening to the in the night. I was sat in on 90.1 light and power class committee meetings, and it was really interesting to see how the sausage is getting made. It's really interesting to see where some of this code comes from. My biggest takeaway that I will share with everybody is there's really smart people and really dedicated people that are sitting in those committees that are really thinking about the decisions that are being made. And it's really easy to look at something like 50% of outlets have to be switched, or
Mm.
if you're making changes to the infrastructure in your building, including a lamp change, if you change more than 25% of your lighting control system, the entire system needs to get brought up to code, and think somebody hates me. Right? Somebody's making this decision in a vacuum. They don't understand what I'm actually going through. It's just somebody they don't get it, and I can
Yeah.
guarantee from talking to all of the people that are sitting in that committee that they get it and they understand it, and they're very passionate towards trying to find solutions to some of the challenges. One of the things that I thought was fascinating is I sat in on some other meetings as well that were hosted by a lot of the HVAC stuff, because when you're
Mm.
dealing with ASHRAE, as I'm sure you know, and as I'm sure you've encountered, when you start talking about energy code in the country, lighting and power, which is our world, right? I mean,
Mm.
it's gigantic for us, is
Yeah.
like that big
Right.
Yeah.
in the grand scheme of things, right? We're super
Yeah.
easy to blame because we're the thing on the wall people can touch, right? So it's got to be
Yep.
lighting's fault that we're using too much energy in this building. Um, but there's other places involved. So I was in this meeting, and it was a couple of researchers and scientists who were presenting from the HVAC side, and they were talking specifically about HVAC and dealing with occupancy, and handling occupancy and handling non-occupancy, and some information and studies that they were running into
Mm.
about how do we determine this, because some of the findings that they came out with are, when you're in a low energy situation, for whatever that reason might be, people are very willing to accept that the lights may turn off or go dim, but you raise the
Mm.
temperature in the room by 10 degrees and everybody loses their minds, right? So
Yeah.
so we we are a world of comfort
Yeah.
inside of buildings, and I get it, right? Because none of the buildings have windows that open anymore. So if the air isn't moving, you have no way to stabilize the temperature.
Right.
And but they were talking about some of these challenges of how do we deal with this, and how do we identify occupancy versus non-occupancy, because HVAC doesn't necessarily know those things and doesn't necessarily have the pieces in place to be able to handle and support that. And they came back to a study, and I'm going to do my best to quote the numbers correctly, but I might be slightly off. But during COVID, University of California, Davis, the entire university basically closed. They closed the
Mm.
entire university down and went 100% remote, or almost. They went 90% remote for the duration of like 24 to 36 months. And someone had the forethought to do an energy study while this was happening,
Mm.
because 90% of the campus was vacant.
Right.
Yep.
They reduced energy over the entire campus by less than 20%.
Oh God.
Oh, wow. Wow. Huh.
Which blew my mind, right? And this was one of the things that this guy was talking about and so they were trying to figure out why. And the reasons why was no one made any modifications to the HVAC schedule, so the buildings were still being heating and cooled as if they were fully occupied. Nobody made any changes to what was happening with any of the interior or the exterior lighting, so anything that was on a time clock was still turning on and off.
Mm.
The number of things that had to remain on because refrigeration or scientific experimentation or certain things that you
Right.
just
Yep.
don't want to turn off, right?
Yeah.
Don't turn off the particle accelerator, that's bad. That was a tiny percentage of the actual power that was being consumed everywhere. And
Interesting.
that really resonated with me because I think
Yeah.
that's when we as an industry look at opportunities in lighting control, those are opportunities that we can go back and share with our customers as ways to be able to help them legitimately save energy. So he was talking through all of this, and they were talking about the challenges of how does HVAC work with and determine this, and they were still looking into it. And that was kind of the
Hmm.
the overall results of it. I happened to run into him in the lobby of the hotel after his presentation and walked up to him and said, "I really enjoyed your presentation," because I did. I said, "I thought it was really fantastic. I really appreciated it. I thought it was some great information." I said, "I had a question and I didn't want to ask the question in the room because I just didn't feel comfortable asking the question in the room." And he said, "Well, what's your question?" And I said, "Well, in all of the research that you've been doing and in all of the solution finding that you've been having, have you had any conversations with lighting manufacturers, or have you had any conversations with any of the people that are doing the lighting in any of your buildings about occupancy sensing?" And he said, "No. Why?" And as I started to explain that because of energy code, you know, the buildings that he's looking at and the solutions that he's trying to find, and like most of the rooms that you're talking about have some kind of an occupancy sensor in them already that is being used by the lighting control system to determine whether or not the lights should be on.
Yep.
Have you considered just finding a way to tie into that so that we can tell you when the room is occupied or not, because the code says we have to. Had not even considered it.
Yeah.
They had
Well, and
not
and
even considered it.
I think that that is such a great representation of the challenge that we have as lighting control
Yep.
specialists is that we're not even on people's radars.
Hmm.
We're such a small community that it's like, nah, I hadn't considered that. And so we're almost out of time here. I wanna package
Fair
this
enough.
up because
Fair
this
enough. Yeah,
this has
yeah,
been an
please.
awesome conversation and
Yeah.
really so much fun. And we'll definitely have you back on because
No,
there's
I'd love
so
to. I'd love
much
to come back.
here to just extract from you. So, but ultimately, I mean, as far as things go, the difficulty, and it's really kind of timely that you came on here. And as Ron mentioned, we do not coordinate these episodes at all. But I mean, the central theme of what we talk about so much and so frequently is education.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
how do we educate the end users specifically? Because the end users are really the people carrying the torch after we pass it on to them.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
so we need to be able to trust that they're not going to just disable everything after the inspection's over, or
Hmm.
um, you know get so frustrated because troubleshooting is so complicated and there's nobody around to call that they just dismantle stuff or damage stuff because they're frustrated. So, having a resource of education is really important to get to the end user. But I think even further, jumping off of this, what you said here is that we need to reach across the aisle to other trades as well. And we need to
Hmm.
get
Absolutely.
education and resources out to people who this doesn't necessarily apply to, but could
Yeah.
benefit.
Hmm.
And I think we are seeing a growing trend towards that interoperability, but I think we are still very far away from that
Yeah, I
achievement.
agree. I
Um,
completely
but
agree.
but I think leveraging the technicians, leveraging the dealers, leveraging the integrators, and getting, people to really take ownership of the ongoing support for these kinds of projects can at least give us that opportunity to have those conversations going forward with the end
Hmm.
users. Because if we say, for instance, Ron is the go-to person, hey, my lights aren't working, then suddenly it can be, you should talk to Ron if you want to ask him about lighting, because he knows a lot about lighting. He helps me with lighting systems all the time. And so having a more central source of information, we're also just terrible at collating educational materials in this industry. I think
Yeah.
ETC has done a phenomenal job of producing great materials,
Thank
and
you.
I hope that the listeners go check out etcconnect.com for a lot of the resources that are on there. But it's one location. It's not,
Hmm.
and the
Yeah.
Lighting Controls Association tries to also provide central
Some great
resources.
classes. There's some really good classes there. I've taken a few of them myself. Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's just sort of like, how do we get these people to listen to us and get the right people in the room at the right time to have these conversations, to tap on people's shoulders like you did, which, huge props, by the way. Love hearing about those kinds of interactions of like, hey, have you thought about this? No, I hadn't thought about that. So, we really need to do more of that as an industry, as experts in the field, to really push people to start considering it in a serious way. And
Hmm.
and I think, the electrification challenge, we should be part of that conversation. Are we going to solve the
Absolutely.
problem? Absolutely not. But we can absolutely help with that. And additional, because like you said, every room has an occupancy sensor, every room has a switch. So there is a way to tap into that potential. But
Hmm.
integration and interoperability are the heavy lifts right there.
Yeah,
And
I completely agree. And I
so,
think as at times we can be competitors. I
Hmm.
say this as a manufacturer. I know you're in a similar boat at times with other dealers or with other organizations. But I think there comes a time where, clearly what I've seen from listening to the podcast is we're all having the same problem and we all
yes.
need to find the same solution. And I think you two are doing a really good job. To props
Oh,
to
well, thank
you
you.
of having these conversations and getting people together to think about it and starting to form organizations like Nailed and being part of that. Did I pronounce that correctly? It's just like sudden
Yes,
moment of
nailed.
panic.
Yep.
Good. Phew. All right. Whew. Okay.
Well, and we didn't
But
we didn't start Nailed. Nailed is
no,
is is the organization we're under, but
but but
CLCSI.
but looking at these kind of organizations to say, okay, you can pull a pool of people together to start coming up with some of these solutions so that we can work towards finding one. I don't have a
Yes.
Right.
solution. If I had the solution, I would have like hit that 40 minutes ago, and saved us a lot of time. But I don't have a solution for it either. But I think it's a problem that we all can work collectively to find, because we're all looking at it from, it's a similar problem that has different approaches. And I
Yeah.
totally agree with you that education and getting people to understand it is the first and most important part. It's critical that people understand, what I look to for in education all the time. Quick aside, I know we're going over, and I apologize
No,
for
it's
that.
fine. No worries.
Is what the thing I always look for when building a course, and the thing I always look for when taking a course or explaining something, is what I call the WIFM. What's in it for me? and
Mm,
Mm.
and learners need that, right? So if you're putting a class together, or if you're putting something together that's solving a problem or trying to get a conversation started, people have to understand why you're sharing this information with them and what they're going to get out of learning it.
yeah.
And I think there's an opportunity there, especially with something like this, to give people enough information that they can understand, look, this is, like it or not, you're going to have to do these things when you design a lighting control system. Like it or not, you're going to have to provide this information when you're putting the system together. Like it or not, the customer is going to have to accept this. And it's not my fault, and it's not your fault, and it isn't
Right.
even necessarily the Department of Energy's fault. It's just the way things are going to have to be.
Yeah.
And let's work together to make it work, right?
Yeah, and I think that's super important because one of the things that we've talked about, and I think we know just from doing the show is 90%, if not more, of the people that listen are colleagues. They're not customers, right? There are a
Hmm.
lot of very smart people, I'm sure, who have listened to this show and certainly who have been on the show. And there's no shortage of people across the country and across the globe because we've had people from multiple countries now on the show, and it's fascinating, and it's great to have all the listeners. But we understand that you're all just like us. So you're all colleagues of ours in the industry.
Hmm.
And ultimately, this entire conversation is about how do we work together to help get to this next point, right? And we all
Right.
understand it's education and it's this, and we need to work together as a group to start to move the industry forward and reach out with that message and continue that education to the building owners, to the end users, to distributors, to everybody who needs it, everyone who touches the system, has an interaction with the system, who sells the system, right? It falls back to all of us. We all have that responsibility, and that's really where this comes down to. And I think ETC obviously has done a great job of that and putting together those resources and being sort of that company that says we're here for you and we're going to be here for you. And that's
We
evident
try.
from
We certainly
anyone
try.
who's ever called tech support. I can guarantee you that is evident if you've ever called tech support. Although,
I would
while
agree.
I will advocate right now, I would love a direct tech support line for technicians. I'm just going to throw that out there. I'm not going to
I
just, I'm just saying. But aside from that,
I need you
no.
right now here.
what was that? What? Huh?
But, yeah, exactly. But no.
Let
So,
me just
yeah.
say you are heard. That is that I am not in support any longer, and I'm certainly not going to. I can't comment on it, but it is an understood and heard request, and it is definitely finding solutions to make it easier for you in the field to get faster answers and a more direct conduit so that you're not having to sit on hold, while either we're paying you to be on hold or you're paying your staff to sit on hold for a phone call is absolutely something that we understand, and we're definitely working on some solutions for it.
Awesome. Well, yeah. So, David, thank you so much. And
Well,
we're
thank
not
you.
trying to scare people. I know the end of the
No,
podcast as we
no,
got
no,
into some of the ASHRAE stuff. We're not trying to scare anybody, but
not at all.
these things are happening. It is coming, and we all have to work together to really come up with the right solutions, right? And that's really what this is all about: is coming to the
I
right solutions.
I agree. I think so, in a lot of cases, I think what it comes down to is being aware of it doesn't mean you have to be afraid of it or fight it. But if you understand where it's coming from, then when you see the quote, when you see the specification, when you see the request for information that comes to your desk, you understand where it's coming from, right? No one is arbitrarily deciding to put switched relays on 50% of their outlets. No one is
Right.
making a decision to say we want we want your system to now suddenly be responsible for energy reporting of all power being consumed by the lighting system in the building, just cuz we just thought that'd be cool
Right.
to throw in there as a, it's so it isn't anything to be afraid of, but it is something to be, I think, as you said, aware of, so that
Yeah.
as it starts coming into being, we can all collectively be coming up with solutions for it, or more importantly, for those customers that don't know they need it,
Mhm.
to be able to have that conversation with them as the system's under design or development, so that when the AHJ shows up, they don't suddenly have to swap half the equipment in their facility.
Right.
And I have to say this just for Paul Greening's sake, because he's brought it up to me a few times. The other thing I think we all collectively want to avoid is walking into that convention hall or walking into that auditorium and seeing three different occupancy sensors on the wall from three
Yes.
different pieces of equipment that are in the building, because the alarm system
Yes.
needs one, the HVAC system
Yep.
needs one, and the lighting system needs one. So you get this
Yep.
cluster of sensors that are all doing the exact same thing to serve three different purposes when you could have one piece of equipment on that wall.
Right.
And I'd love it for it to
Yeah.
be
Yep.
mine, But if it's not mine, let's make sure that we all have the ability to talk together so that we don't have to put the array on the wall just to solve the same problem.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, David, thank you so much for your time. I
Thank you.
really appreciate it. I will just take this moment to remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association, and it's also financially supported by NAILD, the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors.
And you should check out our website if you haven't, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. All of our episodes, newsfeed, merch store, our Council on Lighting Control Startup and Integration, as well as a training page. Check all of those out if you're unfamiliar with it. But also, big thanks to ETC for this episode. Really couldn't do it without you guys, and really love the product, love the resources you guys come out with, but also especially the snapback that you just came out with. I think it's a great solution for a lot of the challenges that we deal with when it comes to integration with DMX in small scale applications, where you just need something that takes in either streaming ACN or UDP commands, because you don't always need the full paradigm system to be controlling your lighting all of the time. Sometimes you just need something to hold the system for a little bit. And granted, this can be scaled to a large degree. You don't have to do the full paradigm system if, again, you're just looking for a pause button for your lighting, essentially. This can be scaled to 50 different components all in one system, taking in streaming ACN commands, 10 different looks per device. So really great resource. And so thank you so much. Check them out, etcconnect.com. But until the next time we see you guys, thank you so much for joining us. And David, thank you so much. This was such an awesome conversation.
Oh, this has been a pleasure. This has been a lot of fun. I was completely nervous, and you've definitely put me at ease. This has been a blast. Thank you.